Good afternoon, Lilligans, anti-novelists, curious onlookers, and friends. Welcome to this episode of Zettelkasten for Fiction, where imagination finds order, the book that I'm writing for you to help get your writing done. I got a question in a writing group earlier today about story units. I often refer to story units as living items that exist out of your imagination onto the page. And there was a question about, is that a chapter? Well, no, let me answer that here. I've drawn this card out for you. A story unit is what I like to refer to as a building block for a scene into a chapter. So think of a story unit as sentences that add up into paragraphs. Now, a viable story unit is going to be different for each one of us because we each have a different writing rhythm. That's where it's important to keep a few notes about what works for you, because your story units into scenes, into chapters, are going to be different from mine most likely. My story unit generally consists of 300 to 500 words. Now, that's a loose average, but it gives you an idea. So when I sit down to write, I like to write in 25-minute sprints, and that usually yields me around 600 words. So that's my rate of imagination. That's my rate of translating what I'm thinking into my hand while I'm typing and getting those words onto the page. Some of you who are faster typists might have 1,000 words in a 25-minute sprint. Some of you, if you're writing by hand, might only have 300 or 400. It doesn't matter. The number is totally arbitrary. It's just a measure that allows you to have a metric so you can choose your progress and then start charting a goal. We'll break that down in a second, but let's finish looking at this. So, a story unit is comprised of sentences and paragraphs. Those paragraphs then make up scenes. Scenes necessarily have sequels, rinse and repeat, and those items gel together to create a chapter. A chapter is simply a narrative module. So scene and sequel can be alternatively stated as a scene is any action and its sequel is a reaction. And that can be either something dramatic, it can be an internal character reaction. It can simply be a character having a monologue or thinking about something. It doesn't have to be bombs blowing up. Again, I'm not focusing exclusively on what everyone likes to talk about, which is the 8 plot points, the 3-act structure, and the traditionally Western conflict-driven narrative. Yes, I begin with those because that's the story that we all intuitively understand because it's been drummed into our heads. But we're going to examine a lot more different kinds of story from around the world. So let's just suffice it to say for our purposes here, whatever kind of story that you're writing, you're going to begin with sentences and paragraphs. Those are going to gel into scenes and sequels. As you're thinking through, what does this scene need? Well, maybe the scene needs a sequel or a reaction where your character is thinking about something. All of those become your minimum viable unit, your MVU. An MVU is the minimum unit of writing that can stand on its own as a set or a section. So it may be the lead into a chapter. It may be an entire chapter. It may be an epilogue. There's a million things that your minimum viable unit could be, but most importantly, it is a piece of writing that stands on its own. So maybe that is the introduction piece of a chapter, a little bit of a conflict or action or activity, some kind of milestone happening. And at the end of that chapter, there is a discovery of some sort in your story. And let's say that that whole sequence takes place in 1,100 words. Okay? So the scene, the sequel, and the wrap-up, or the cliffhanger, whichever way you write it, is 1,100 words, and that's your MVU. Then the next decision that you make as a writer is, how many MVUs, minimum viable units, do I need to create a chapter? Well, if you've done your homework and thought through what you want your story to look like, or for my pantsers, if you've done your writing and now you're ready to go back and put that story into the sequencing in the order that it needs to be in to make it a good narrative, either way, you're creating chapters. And then you're leaving one chapter on a set of action, and then leading into the next chapter where you have that reaction. That's how you stitch those together. That's the place where I am currently in my novel. The novel that I've set aside writing, actually it's written, I'm in the middle of a developmental edit, but I've set that aside so I can finish this book for you. But in my writing process, I'm at the point where I took one novel that was finished, I broke it apart into all of its component minimum viable units, and I stitched it back together, making that one book into a trilogy. So I'm now ready to begin the process, when this book is done for you, of doing the connective tissue, writing those pieces that connect the disparate parts together so that I have a cohesive whole for book one. That's my goal, is to get through the developmental edit so that book one is ready to go. So, in summary, as you sit down to write, here's my suggestion for how you get that done. Know what is your minimum viable unit. If you sit down for 25 minutes and you generate 500 words, that is your minimum viable unit. That's your chunk for how you think. Well, let's toggle that. Maybe you find that you write better for 20 minutes, or maybe you find that you write better for 40 minutes. You've got to find your sweet spot of time and see what you generate during that time. That's your MVU. Then you can say, okay, if I sit down in 25-minute sprints and I know I'm going to get 500 words, then if I want to write a 2,000-word short story, I need 4 sprints, right? 5, 10, 15, 20, 2,000, done. If you want to write a 100,000-word novel, well, you're going to have to toggle those numbers and figure out how many 25-minute sprints at roughly 500 words is going to get me to that big novel number. That's how you break it down. So I would encourage you to take some time over this next week or two when you're doing your writing exercises. Set a timer, start with 25 minutes, that's a nice round number, and just bury your head in the keyboard or on the page if you're handwriting. See how many words you get in that 25 minutes. And then do it again. Do it a couple, 3 times, and get that average. That way you've got that MVU locked in. Then you start to chart a course, if you're working on a long project like a novel, for how you can get there. Once you know that you need, let's just say, 50 MVUs of writing time, that's 50 25-minute sprints. Okay, then you can look at your calendar and you can block out that time, and bingo, kiddo, you're writing a novel. You're going to get it done because you know what it takes to get it done. This is not plotting. This is not planning or even puzzling. It wouldn't even necessarily be labeled pantsing. It's just knowing what you can do in the given set period of writing time that you have, and then using that output and that timeline as a metric by which to measure how you can succeed to the end of your project. So I will leave you with that to chew on. Set yourself some time goals and see how far you can get within that time, and use those numbers to chart a course forward. That is my advice for today. I will get back to it tomorrow. We're going to continue talking about discovery writing, and I'm going to start showing you some of the chapters that are finished in the Zettelkasten for Fiction book, because some of you have asked about what that looks like. So I'm going to start sharing that with you because you are my faithful compadres in this crazy writing journey that I've embarked on. But my goal is to have this book ready for you by September 21st. So I've calculated my MVUs, and I'm going to fit those little writing slots into every piece of my available day and get this book done into your hands. That way, someday, I can hold your book in my hands. That's my goal. I will see you tomorrow.